So, very welcome to this PREPSOIL webinar concerning soil literacy among young people. Why does it matter and how can educators deal with it? I will start. My name is Kristina Lundström. I work as a researcher at the SLU, Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. And I will introduce the webinar, and then we have three very interesting presentations. So I will start to share my screen with you for a short presentation. So, first of all, I would like to say that we are only almost 200 people who are registered for this webinar. And that's very nice because this is an important task to talk about, and we haven't talked so much about soil literacy among young people before, I think. During this webinar, we will do like this, that if you have questions, you please write them in the chat, and then my colleague Elin will read the questions, and if the presenters have possibilities to answer it in the chat, they will do. Otherwise, they will answer when Elin has read the questions. So we have some questions after each presentation, and then we have the rest of the questions at the end of the webinar. And maybe if we have time at the end, you will also have a possibility to ask the presenters by yourself. So once more, welcome to this webinar. And I will just talk a little about the Soil Deal for Europe and the PREPSOIL project. And then afterwards, Fredrika Mårtensson from the SLU will talk about why should we increase young people's access to nature and its soils. After her presentation, we will have two presenters from the winners in 2024 from the call Good Examples of Soil Education in the PREPSOIL project. And they will talk about their projects Love Your Wellies from Ireland by Katie Smirnova and The Soil to Educate from Italy by Erika Guerini. And then we have questions and reflections, and finally, the end of the webinar. So I will start with some information about the Soil Deal for Europe and the PREPSOIL project. Soil Deal for Europe is one part of the mission Soil Health and Food. So it's a really important area that the EU Commission had decided. In parallel with cancer, climate change, climate neutral cities, and healthy oceans, seas, and other kinds of waters. In the Soil Deal for Europe, the aims are to establish 100 living labs and lighthouses to lead the transition towards healthy soils by 2030. And the Soil Deal for Europe deals with soils in agriculture, in forest, and in urban. So it's all kinds of soils. And there are 8 aims for the Soil Deal for Europe. To reduce desertification, to conserve soil organic carbon stocks, stop soil sealing, reduce soil pollution, prevent erosion, improve soil structure to enhance soil biodiversity, and reduce the EU global footprints on soils. And finally, the task for this webinar, to improve soil literacy in society. So, a Soil Deal for Europe states that the lack of knowledge and awareness of the cruciality of long-term soil health among different stakeholders and society at large is a major driver of soil degradation. Therefore, raising awareness and knowledge on soil health is important in order to make more people identify themselves as soil stewards, and different groups have the necessary knowledge to improve soil practices and implement effective actions. soils is something that is important for all of us. So the PREPSOIL project is one of the first projects within the Soil Deal for Europe, and it should facilitate it, and this will be achieved through co-creation and tools, and by spaces for interaction and knowledge sharing and co-learning, as well as stock taking and dialogue among a broad range of actors. And you can read more about the PREPSOIL project at the www.prepsoil.eu. And as I said, one part of this project considered soil literacy among young people. That part of the project had 2 calls for good examples of soil education for youth, one in 2023 and one in 2024. And we turned to primary, secondary, as well as vocational training schools and asked them to send in their good examples. And we asked for real activities where teachers were doing something with their pupils, not only materials. So all in all, we have more than 50 applicants from Austria, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Spain, Poland, and Sweden. And in this webinar, 2 of the winners will present their projects, and they come from Italy and Ireland. So young people are important, an important target group for soil literacy, since they are going to be consumers, or already are consumers, as well as future decision makers and politicians. And the importance of soil knowledge is connected to soil as a central resource for humanity, for food production, of course, and clean water. But there are also more reasons for relating young people to the nature and soils. So, and the next presenter will talk about more reasons for why it is important for young people to get in contact with nature and soils. So I will introduce Fredrika Mårtensson from the SLU, who will talk about why should we increase young people's access to nature and its soils. And Fredrika is an associate professor in environmental psychology at the University of Agricultural Sciences. She works with outdoor environments for human health and well-being. Her focus is on nature experience and the psychological processes involved in transactions with the physical environment during play, learning, and social life. She has developed the outdoor play environment categories for health promoting design. So I will stop share, and then I will be very glad to listen to your presentation. Welcome, Fredrika.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to this session. It is really a new thing for me to talk about soil, and I don't think I put it in the heading. We did so, of course, but actually my scope of research is on a broader level, the quality of outdoor environments and children's health. But let's try. Here is a picture of me to the right, working with Amanda Gabriel from my department. We are out in a project together with preschool teachers to explore where there are play biotopes. And I will come back to what is a play biotope. So they looked for places where children liked to be. So it was just meeting here at Zoom. We don't see each other so much. So I thought you would see me into context here. Yeah. Let's see where I should press. Yes. it's very nice with these EU projects where you meet people from all across Europe. These are pictures from an Erasmus project where we worked with the quality of outdoor preschools. And there are really huge similarities. Children's play are very similar in many ways, and the benefits for health are very similar. But our conditions, our weather, our culture, way of approaching children and nature are also very different. One of the places we went to that I want to put your attention to is the last picture of a forest garden. I think that was a very interesting concept for putting children into contact, like you are doing with the soil learning. On a very small space, you can create a lot of learning, and so that really fascinated me. But there are many ways to put children into contact with their surroundings, and there is really lack of that on all levels. We talk today in research about the extinction of experience, and that's really a huge question. Yes, it started in 1991 at SLU Alnarp. We put the very first studies on this subject. At that time, we compared very roughly, not at all at this detail level that we talk today, at the soil level. We studied preschools without nature, with much less nature, I should say, and with a lot of nature, a garden actually. And we found that there were huge differences in the play behavior of children. In the more plain environment, this is the more plain environment, there were much more conflicts. Children were busy trying to appropriate places. They're trying to use this bench to create their own space. They are taking tools. They are having conflicts about tools. Everyone wants to have a bike. And that's the kind of behavior that comes with densification and little nature. On the other hand, this garden environment, the play behavior was totally different. There were open play sessions where they could involve many children. They could withdraw, play very calmly. They could run. They could change place. They could change, the pretend play was much more salient. There was much more fantasy in their play. And this is really something that caught our interest. So since then, we did different studies on the quality of outdoor play in relation to the physical environment and also output on health, because we had some assumptions that this would also have implications for health. This kind of play, the play of flux and transformation, that is very open-ended. We defined a tool for that, the outdoor play environment categories. So doing all these studies on preschool outdoor environment, I elaborated on a tool, the outdoor play environment categories that Christine was mentioning. And this has been used many times for studying the health impacts of preschool outdoor environments. We did studies in the States and in Sweden in our research group. So it's a combination of the total outdoor area and the proportion of area containing shrubbery, trees, or hilly terrain, and to what extent the play equipment and vegetation are integrated and surrounded by open space. So this is a very rough indication of quality for outdoor play. And all the measurement, here you can see a list of the measurements. Health is a very huge concept, but the measurement we did were well-being indicators, infections, cortisol, BMI, UV radiation. You should have sun, but not too much and not too little. The BMI, fitness, UV radiation, and sleep and attention capacity. I put the one on attention capacity in green because that's actually what environmental psychology deals a lot with. All this information we get today about green environments being restorative, it's about the cognitive and the affective effect on our bodies. But there are huge very many different. And today you talk about children's total physical and socio-emotional development is affected by having green, varied, and well-integrated surroundings around you. Yeah, and I gave you some references here if you want to read further. This is a study from last year. We are looking because in Sweden, and I know in many other places, at least in the Scandinavian countries and in many countries, you've built much larger institutions. Usually and traditionally in Sweden, we had at the most 70 children in a preschool, but today we build facilities that are for a couple of hundred children many times. And this changes the conditions for children and and also the outdoor environments. So I would say these older preschool buildings have more proximity to the vegetation and to porous material, and that should be interesting for you, I guess. It's not, I mean, the quality of dirt I cannot guarantee, but there is much more possibilities for cultivation, for example, and to get in contact with dirt. Yeah, so that's quite like a typical example of the more traditional preschool. But today, when we build more huger facilities, children have to go 2 floors up. The connection between outdoor and indoor is not as easy, and children cannot on their own go outdoors, take on their boots and run out. They have to wait for staff. And we know from research that tend to mitigate the overall physical activity during a day. And they're also the very smallest children. We follow the very smallest children and can see that they tend to stay by the buildings where the staff is, and the contact with nature becomes less, and it's more varied in general. Yeah, so these are the kind of the context to our research today. When we started, there was nearly nothing on this field, but now we are, from many countries, we are studying these effects, and that's very good. And we recently made a review into and found 130 scientific papers showing what kind of effects the access to greenery has. And if you look into the culture ecosystem services, you find our research, because it's very much about children's play behavior, their social life, physical activity, and the social climate, that green surroundings tend to promote the positive social climate in the group. You can see that already at the school ground, for example. The restorative effects, the cognitive function, children get better school results in green surroundings, and the mental health, that we could see that, for example, young people having access to green surroundings, they have better mental health. So evidence is increasing, even if it's not that many. But there are also other more basic facts about air quality, the soundscape affected by greenery, the sunlight and heat protection. And now we're coming to the soil question. I don't know if you've heard about those new studies from Finland, where they studied implementation of soil and the that affected the immune system. This is research from Finland, and the pictures are from a preschool in Umeå in Sweden. And it's just an example of how very good conditions can be in Sweden. But I will on the same time tell you that in this preschool that is surrounded with all this greenery, it looks really nice. They are not out in this environment more than once a month. So for the rest of the time, they are on the playground once a month. And that's due to a lot of organizational thing, having too little staff and so on. So it can look very nice, but the question is, do children have this contact with the soil and with the ground and with the nature? Anyway, this Finnish study, they implemented segments of forest floor, sod, planters for growing annuals, and peat blocks for climbing and digging. And the children had access to that during a month. And that created a change in their skin and gut microbiota, modulating the function of their immune system. And that can help to protect from different immune-mediated diseases like diabetes and inflammatory bowel disease, etc. So this is really, I mean, the immune system is really something that still renders a lot of research, but this is really interesting results, and I think it's worth looking further into this. We made a study in Örebro comparing 3 different types of playgrounds, and now we are on play behavior again. So we compared a traditional playground and a forest. It wasn't just a piece of forest, and a digital playground integrated in forest. I will say that the traditional playground, you can see from the picture, a kind of typical Swedish traditional playground where there is greenery. It's not forest, but there is some greenery. So it's not like extremes we are comparing. But the output of what this was a little surprising was that the forest was actually the one that triggered most play behavior. The play behavior was most varied. There were most pretend play, and the physical activity was highest. I would have bet that a digital nature would have won this game, but actually, so that put even more pressure on the role of nature for children's play. Especially we know from other studies when it comes to school children that for children, it's forest land is directly correlated to physical activity, but not for boys. They're more, there the correlations are higher on sports, but for girls they are crucial. Yeah, so we go more and more into the details, and that's why I'm really happy to be invited to a session like this on soil with you people in different European countries, because I'm getting more and more interested into these details. Before it was more on the general level, green, varied, but I think we really have to go into the detail to really understand what is effective and what children require and what fascinates children and so on. Yeah, and here is, so this were the 2 playgrounds that we compared, the more and less green. That was still huge differences. So going into diversity and detail demands a lot of cross-disciplinary work. I work today with ecologists, biologists. I need to learn a lot of new words. My vocabulary needs to be extended. I didn't manage that today. So for you, you get a lot of Swedish words here to describe nature. But over time, when you work, I know that from working with people in medicine, you learn, but it takes time for us when we work across disciplines. And there are also different ways, new ways in detail to see and scrutinize what kind of ecology is here, how much stones, how much moss, how much blueberry rice, and so on, and see what correlations we find. We should not forget animals. Children love animals. We know that from family lives, wanting to have a pet and so on. But I think as societies, we don't really care enough about this actually big want from children. They do want to have contact with nature and with animals, but where are they? Animals are not as demanding as people. They can, when the siblings quarrel, the pet can be there. And what can you find on your way to school? How do we keep the ecosystems all over the place so that children have this connection, not only with nature in general, but can learn to know and becomes friends also with animals? There are a lot of so I would say social effects on that, being social with animals, but also moral thinking and more. We did a review on this, but actually we are a little late. There are some research around the world, but it's quite little actually on children and animal out in the wild. Okay, to come further with this nature-based outdoor playgrounds. We have developed in collaboration with biology and ecologists, we developed a concept called play biotopes. There we borrow the vocabulary from ecology and describe how a place is working when it comes to play behavior. And I think we have a few articles on this subject if you are interested. And I think it's like it helps us to connect the different perspectives. In practice, we work, here is playgrounds in Örebro together with the Department of Planning. We are going out, we have to work on place. When you plan this kind of wild landscape where children have contact with nature, you cannot sit by the desk and sketch it. It's much too complex. So we go out there, researchers, people in horticulture, the people digging, the planners, landscape architects, and we go there and we try to find solutions while we are working. And you can find this catalog of play biotopes. Actually, it's a lot of pictures. So even if it's in Swedish, I think you will find it helpful with a lot of concepts for playgrounds. So here we're building a landscape for running. And the first thing we did was to invite preschool children to come and use the area. And guess what? Of course, they didn't go for the playgrounds, the beginning playgrounds. They went for the pure soil. That was the most interesting part. That's quite informative. And based on that, we tried that was one of many inputs in this process to see how they behaved in relation to the landscape. And I don't think this part of the playground, I don't think we would have done if it wasn't through the eyes of the children to how you can create a drama and what's interesting for them. It was inspired also by a story by Astrid Lindgren called Ronja Rövardotter, where there is this very deep channel in the landscape. Yeah, so this was an example how to create nature-based playgrounds together with children. Now I only have a few more slides, and it's more like reflection slides, things that maybe I would like to send with you and that I also think a lot on further. And one is this huge biodiversity loss that is an ongoing process. And it's not on a general level, and it's also very particular in children's environments. If you look at the first picture here, that's a sky view over Umeå, over in one of the areas. It's just forests. Sweden has, I don't think it's about 68 or even more % of forest. And in this part of Sweden, it's even more. But when you build a preschool, you take it away and you start from zero. And that's the huge process. It will take generations of children to create an interesting, complex environment that will benefit their play and health. So you see the result in the lower pictures. And that's really malfunctioning planning, but it's still ongoing. So here we really could do things to change. I have a question, and that's, do we really need to activate nature? I think a lot of you are not in that mindset, but in lots of parts of planning, you tend to think that you need to put digital elements or other fun elements in nature in order to get children interested. I think that's true if the landscape is just plain. If it's just grass, if it's no biodiversity, that's true. But if there are animals, if there are a big biodiversity, children are very curious and very fascinated by that. And you don't need to activate nature. And what happens when we entertain children with nature? That's not I don't think it's the right way to go. At least not most of the time. I think it can be good. Also, if you work very, very detailed level, I think it's good to understand outdoor play. What's the dimension, the existential dimension, that when children go outdoors, as for us, it's to explore the world. They will always be interested also of the things around. I usually ask people, do you think that the children will run into A or to B? This is the same place, but they could either go for B or for A. Yes, they go for B. They want to go up the hill and see, there is the view. The view is here on the top. Children are curious of what's around, and that's the basic drive when we are outdoors. You always have to calculate that. Here in this place, the teachers wanted the children to play in the water, and that's usually hugely fascinating. But actually, there's one thing that is even more interesting, and that's to explore the world, the big world. And that's something to just have with you, and to encourage this, or to take advantage of this, I would say. Doing cultivation, we did, I just done a small study on cultivation, but I can see the struggle. These are not cultivation assignment, but I found these pictures from another project where children went outdoors to have classes, and you can see the struggles of trying to keep children's interest and concentrated. In the first picture, it was quite a struggle for this teacher. In the other session, they had a theme. They were going to explore how it was to live at the Stone Age. So children used their fantasy to think, oh, where do we want to live if we were living at the Stone Age? They had lessons about that. So they tried to find place. They try to think about how to create food, etc. So it's really about the adaptation of lessons to the outdoor space. And that can be quite tricky, but also hugely interesting, of how to take advantage of all the curiosity children have and all the physical activity they have when they go outdoors. Yes, thank you very much for listening, showing a picture of One Health that I think is a very good initiative to keep us together, researching across in all our interest subjects, not the least the soil subject. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fredrika. It was a really interesting presentation. And we know more and more, and still we don't do what we know we should do. Is that, yeah. But maybe we can change it, of course. Elin, we have some questions, or we can take one or two, maybe.
Yes, sure. I can start with the first one. Are there any studies done on different types of forests and how they influence children's play and health? Like old-grown forest compared to young plantation forests, since biodiversity both in the soil and above ground is different in such environments.
Yeah, I would. It's not a difficult guess to say that the more older forest, if that was the question, compared to plantations, of course, since the biodiversity is higher, and that's what we actually see. Because even if it was not forest in the park example, but actually we had the digital forest was more plain. So that's what we're going into now to compare, because we thought they were quite similar, but when we looked into it, it is more a complex forest, the other one. So yes, it does make a difference, of course.
Okay, thank you very much, Fredrika. I think we need to go further in the program. So now we're going to hear some projects that really do something, and that will be very interesting. And we will start with Love Your Wellies and Katie Smirnova. Katie Smirnova was the public liaison officer with the Farm Peat project in Ireland, which ended in December 2024. In her role, she was responsible for running the Love Your Wellies program for school and higher education students. Now Katie is working with the AI2 Peat project, which is developing Peat Sense, a platform for knowledge sharing and peatland condition monitoring. So I welcome you, Katie, to talk about your experiences from the Love Your Wellies project.
Thank you, Christina. Can you hear me and see my slides?
Yes, we can hear you and see your slides.
Perfect. So thanks so much for having me. So FarmPeat was a project that ran in the Midlands of Ireland over several years, since 2021 to 2024. And as part of that, we had this Love Your Wellies programme, which was our community outreach initiative. And it was a pretty small team. You can see us there in the photograph. There was 4 of us, and myself, Laura, Caroline and Bernie. And there was a few other people involved in the project as well before, including Paddy Malone and Lena Kunkel, who had a really key role in delivering these educational workshops as well. And Paddy initiated the whole competition and workshops, which was absolutely fabulous and had a great impact on those students. So to start with, I wanted to introduce you to what the concept of a raised bog is. So I suppose this is giving you an example of the sort of things that we taught to these young students during the workshops. And we engaged with both primary and secondary school students. So children, you know, from kind of less than 10 years old all the way up to 18 years old in schools, and then even older than that then through the universities. So a raised bog is a type of peatland, and the FarmPeat project focused on these particular types of habitats around Ireland. And we worked in different counties in the middle of Ireland. So a raised bog is a type of peatland that has very few nutrients. It's fed by rainfall, and they form in these shallow lakes or depressions up as far as 10,000 years ago. And they grow very slow at about 1 millimeter a year. And so this means that they accumulate depth as they grow. So some of the oldest bogs in Ireland are up to 12 meters deep, and younger bogs are a bit shallower. And the photograph in the background there shows, you know, the sort of plants that you might find in a bog. And when we brought the students out to the field trips to see these habitats, we always try to point out that, you know, when you're looking out at a habitat like this, it might look like a sea of green and brown. And when you look a little bit closer, you actually start to see the diversity in the plants. And we tried to link that as well to the condition of the bog. So for example, here we see water, we see lots of moss. That's a really good sign. We want to see these sorts of pools in these peatlands. And then on the outskirts, we see heather, which generally shows drier conditions. So we try to link this to the students, that plants, you know, you can use plants to learn about the environment and how healthy these habitats are. And these are some of the plants and animals that we tried to teach them about. So as was mentioned in the previous presentation, you know, children have a real connection to animals. But we also wanted to show them the cool plants that you might see in a bog that you won't see anywhere else. So for example, the butterwort, the bladderwort, and the sundew are 3 examples of carnivorous plants, plants that eat insects. And usually, you know, children might think, oh, you know, plants are boring, they just sit there, they do nothing. And generally when we start talking about these insect eating plants, you know, you can see them sit up a little bit straighter and pay more attention. And when you tell them how these plants trap insects by whether the insects stick to the leaves or to the little gloopy blobs on the end of the sundew, or how they get sucked into the water in the bladderwort, you know, that activity really activates their imagination. And similarly, then we talk about the sorts of animals that you might see on the bog. So like the viviparous lizard, which is always really cool for them because a lot of children and a lot of adults don't actually know that there's a lizard that's native to Ireland, and it's our only lizard. And then the hen harrier on the top right is Ireland's kind of most rare bird of prey nowadays. And you won't necessarily see them soaring through the bogs, but we always try to say, you know, that all of the diversity in these bogs, in these peatlands, enables these massive birds of prey to survive and to thrive, and that the health of these habitats creates a home for these animals. And so it's raising the awareness of conserving the soils, conserving the habitats that these soils support, and then in turn supporting the plants and animals that depend on them. And the sphagnum moss there, the reddish orange plant, I want you to keep in mind for later on. I'm going to chat a bit more about that later. And then these are some of the other things we mentioned, just the importance of peatlands in the fight against climate change, how cool they are from a historical and archaeological point of view, For example, there's been butter found in the bog that had been stored there or preserved. There's also been bog bodies found that had been preserved for years and years because things don't decompose in the bog because of the high water level. We also talk about the importance of bogs in Irish history from a turf cutting point of view, how they, enabled Ireland to gain energy independence, but how nowadays we're trying to move away from that for environmental reasons. We also mentioned the importance of spending time out in nature. So usually we do these workshops before we go out on the bog, and we kind of say, like, there's real benefits for your mental health, spending time out in bogs and in peatlands and just taking a few moments to connect to that landscape can completely change your day. Like, you might start off with a really crappy day, be really annoyed or sad, and then you go out and you spend some time out on the bog and you feel a little bit better. So these are the ways we kind of try to communicate the importance of these habitats and of these soils. And then the Farm Peat project itself then actually focuses in on the farmland as well, which we generally mention for the older students. So we don't necessarily talk about farmland in the same detail with the younger students. We try to keep it a little bit more to the raised bogs. But with the older students, we always mention these agricultural peat soils, because a lot of the students that are taking part in these workshops, some of them might come from farms, their parents or their grandparents might be farmers, and they are generally farming around this sort of landscape. So in this photograph on the left, you can see that there's a bog in the background and then the grassland, the farmland in the front. And this transition is really important for peat soils. So the grassland in the front used to be bog, but then was reclaimed and changed over to agriculture. And in Ireland, these cover a huge tract of land, up to 339,000 hectares. And because of the fact that these soils are drained, they're emitting carbon dioxide every single, as soon as they're drained, they're emitting carbon dioxide. And unless that water level is brought up, those carbon emissions will continue. And also that peat is actually wasting away and making the farmland no longer productive in the long term. So that that's generally very abstract for the students, but for the older students, they will have learned about climate change in school. So it's a way of saying, connecting the farmland to what they're learning about with environmental issues. And we also link in biodiversity there. So for example, the devil's bit scabious, that purple flower, is one of the species that we look for as a positive indicator on these agricultural soils. And to communicate the importance of this plant, we say, that this marsh fritillary butterfly, the beautiful orange and yellow one there in the bottom, depends on this devil's bit scabious flower as its food plant. So no flower, no butterfly. And this butterfly is the only legally protected insect in Ireland. So it's really important that we protect these agricultural peat soils so that these butterflies can thrive. So again, linking the habitats to the animals and insects that depend on them. And we had 53 project farmers take part in the scheme, and they were paid for nature. So the higher the score, the higher the payment level. And we assessed this using different types of plants, and we went out and surveyed these during the summer. So for students, this offers them an opportunity to, when they come home, if they do live on a farm, they can go out and maybe have a look and see, do they spot any of these plants? Do they spot any of the meadowsweet, for example, that white flower on the top right, or any of the meadow or marsh thistles, like the one in the bottom right with the purple flower with the bumblebee on it? Or maybe they spot some of the mosses if they're out on the bog. So it's trying to connect the fact that the farmers are getting paid for biodiversity, for nature, to their own farms or their own land. And we also try to communicate the sort of actions that they take. And again, this would be very much for the older students. So maybe like age 15 up. And for the university students, we start talking about the actions that some of these farmers take. And the idea here is that those students will go home and talk about the importance of these soils to their parents, to their grandparents, and hopefully inspire those adults to take action on their own land. And we always try to communicate that there's different types of people who do this work. And at this age, they might be thinking about careers, what they want to do after school. And so this can be a bit of inspiration as well. Saying, for example, before we do any of this work, we go out, we survey the land, we have to think about what type of rock is underneath, which means looking at the geology, which is a geologist's role, looking at the soil type. So trying to do soil surveys and figuring out what their chemical composition is, which requires soil scientists, figuring out which direction and how intensely the water is moving, which needs hydrologists. So it's giving those children inspiration of all sorts of careers that they might not have known about before. And of course, emphasizing that it's really important to do the correct work in the correct place. So when you're installing dams, like the one on the bottom right, on farmland, that you're doing it in a way that's not going to have impacts that the farmer isn't expecting, and that it's not going to affect neighboring landowners where they don't want to be affected. And that picture on the bottom left shows the fact that peat wastes away. So it's to show the importance of doing this work as soon as possible, because essentially what's happening is these soils are disappearing into thin air. They're oxidizing, they're turning into these gases. And although they might not see it, the grassland and the farmland is actually eroding away in this process of peat wastage. And that graphic there, which shows the monument on a motorway in Ireland that was initially full of these peat soils, and then 20 years later all of that peat soil was just gone, it was empty, is used as an illustration of that this is what's happening to these soils and to this farmland if action isn't taken. And that was just a bit of a quick tour through the sort of things we communicate to those students through Love Your Wellies. And then we, after that, inspire them to take action. So the Love Your Wellies competition is an opportunity for them to tell their own story and to apply these learnings. And within that, we have different themes. So we have the environment theme, farming, community, history, and the students can take any sort of approach they want. They can create a 3D model, they can write a poem, they can write a story, they can draw a picture or a painting, or they can even create a digital animation. The world is really their oyster when it comes to this competition. And throughout the 3 years of the competition, so the competition ran in 2022, 2023, and 2024. And then workshops were delivered from 2021, I think, as well, from November. And throughout the duration of the project, we engaged with over 1,500 students through 51 workshops and webinars, in addition to 19 field trips across 21 schools. And these workshops and field trips then inspired over 800 entries to the Love Your Wellies competition over the 3 years of the project. And we're very grateful and super delighted when we were awarded PREPSOIL's Best Teaching Practices Award in 2024, because it really gave us that boost and a sense of acknowledgement of the work that had been done throughout those 3 years. So in the next few slides, I'll have some photographs to illustrate what some of these workshops and field trips were like, as well as some of the winning entries from the competition, and then I'll wrap up. So these are some of the workshops and field trips we ran. In these, we gave students some interactive activities to investigate the landscape, to draw some of the plants that they saw, and for the older students to actually use identification guides to see if they could figure out what type of plant that was. In the classrooms, we used drawing as a way of expressing, what they learned about the landscape. So the picture in the middle, for example, shows a wader, a curlew, I think, which the student drew to show the importance of the bogs for birds. On the top right, we see a food web. So we gave each student a plant or animal, and they had to create the connections between them. So to figure out, which animals depended on which plants, and that then if we removed part of the food web, how would that affect the other plants and animals? We also brought out sphagnum moss to show how much this bog builder, this plant that composes peatlands, actually holds, and to communicate the fact that these raised bogs wouldn't exist if it weren't for this really unique type of moss. And then on the top in the middle, we see a moth. That was a particularly special field trip we ran with a community group, and Eugene, who's a geography teacher in County Westmeath, he actually went out the night before and set up a moth trap so that when the students came out the next morning, they were able to investigate some of the moths that had been trapped on the bog over the nighttime that were then released back out into the wild. And that big hawk moth was a particularly popular one. You can see the size of it. The students, some of them were more happy to see it than others, I think. But then these are some of the entries that they created as out of these workshops. So in 2022, our winner was this 3D model where Mark in County Roscommon created the bog lens to show his local bog and to identify some of the things that he had seen there. And as you can see, there's loads of different types of mediums. There is a version of Monopoly inspired by the bog that was one of our winning entries. And there was also a group of students who created a play. So kind of a theatre performance showing a life on the farm. And then in 2023, our winner was Olivia Pekskowska, who created an embroidered t-shirt of Clara Bog, showing some of the plants and animals she'd seen there. There was a game of Snap that was illustrated by Ashley Coyle, a comic, a 3D model of the Bogman, and all sorts of beautiful paintings and other models as well, like Changing Times, showing how raised bogs have changed from the past into the present and maybe how they will change into the future too. And then in 2024, the last year of our competition, our winner was Shola Rosny, who explored bog restoration in County Offaly. And she talked about some of the restoration work that had been done and tried to explain it then to younger students in her school. There was also more models, an animated short film called Wildlife in the Peatlands, and a game of Boga, which was inspired by Jenga. So lots of really great examples of creativity here. And you can view all of these on our website, farmpeat.ie, on the Love Your Wellies page, as well as hearing a little bit more from the students and reading their inspiration write-ups. And these are some of the photographs of those award ceremonies that took place when we were selecting the winners of the competition. So there was great feedback from students and everyone really enjoyed their time with the project and attending the workshops and then communicating their entries as well to their family and friends and other students in their school. So that's it from me. You can learn more about the FarmPeat project on our social media, and you can find all those links on farmpeat.ie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. I see that we are a bit late, so we will have the questions afterwards if we have time. But it was a really nice presentation, and you have already sent us to the website for more information to get inspired. But I think I hope you all have the possibility to stay for 10 more minutes and hear the presentation of Erika Gurini and her project, The Soil to Educate. Thank you very much, Katie. So now I want to introduce to you Erika Gurini. She holds a degree in agricultural sciences from the University of Bologna. Since 2012, she has been teaching at primary and secondary schools at the Istituto Pluricomprensivo Brunico in northern Italy. In addition to her teaching role, she designs and implements educational programs focused on global citizenships and environmental issues for her students. Please, Erika.
Thank you.
Welcome to present.
Thank you so much, Christina. Could you see the presentation?
No, we don't.
No.
Not yet.
Not yet. Maybe now. Could you see my presentation?
Yes, so yes, now we do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. The program presented includes activities for kindergarten, primary, and secondary schools, with the aim of expanding the concept of competence beyond the cognitive domain to also include the social and emotional spheres. This approach prepares students for lifelong learning, encouraging them to seek knowledge and develop the skills necessary to live together. Approaching the study of soil involves proposing a pedagogy of soil that enables children to develop awareness, consciousness, and sensitivity about the concept of resources. This creates the foundation for a new cultural project, an innovative idea of city and citizenship. Teaching must provide students with the tools to cooperate on a global scale, addressing issues such as climate change, deforestation, and depletion of organic matter in soil. These are processes that should be understood as global, not confined to specific territories. In Italy, Law 92 recalls the 2030 agenda and emphasizes the importance of developing transversal courses in citizenship education, which must engage all subjects. For the soil program, the objective is to help children understand that soil is a major component of terrestrial ecosystems and one of the planet's most important reservoirs of biodiversity, a limited and non-renewable resource. We need to make it clear that in Italy, 2 square meters of soil are consumed every second, often fertile playing soil, an especially significant concern, as in Italy has very few plains remaining. Where do we start? To introduce children to the study of soil and help them understand its importance, we begin with a food product. To raise awareness that our lifestyles have social, environmental, and economic impacts. To foster new global consciousness. To encourage students to take a stand and envision concrete actions. This is why we focus on 2 widely consumed foods, chocolate and bread. About chocolate, we start by studying the main stages of the cocoa supply chain to identify the origin of a frequently consumed food product, demonstrating how different nations and geographic regions are interconnected and interdependent. Reflect on our own consumption of chocolate and the value we place on this product. Understand the significant environmental impact of cocoa production, including its effect on water, natural resources, and local communities. Recently, a student, a high school student, said, cocoa's supply chain, including the cultivation of coca plants, takes place in Switzerland because chocolate is Swiss. So we also have to explore how packaging can sometimes mislead consumers, presenting a false idea of the ingredients and places of production. We end the unit with a simulation game designed to raise awareness of the environmental consequences of chocolate consumption. Bread. For bread, we study the cereal supply chain to understand that the development of plants is directly related to the quality of water, air, and soil. About soil, to introduce children to the concept of soil, we begin with a brainstorming activity using a template technique. Students write words associated with soil in the outer spaces of a polygon. In the center, in blue, they provide a definition of soil. In the second activity, teacher tells the story of Enrico, the earthworm, and uses a visual aid, a diagram of soil profiles to help students understand what lies under their feet. This is followed by a tactile and sensory activity where primary school students explore the layers of the soil, completing effort that encourages them to analyze the natural materials available. To introduce the functions of soil, we propose a game in which students answer specific questions related to the topic. For instance, how much of the food we eat comes from the soil? 90%. The remaining 1% comes from aquatic ecosystems. Does healthy soil make us happy? What happens if soil is not healthy? The organic matter in soil decreases, loss of arable land, human health deteriorates, lack of food and causes migrations. In the third activity, children create a tactile book using natural materials to represent and summarize the different stages of Enrico's journey through the soil. Older primary school students create more detailed soil profiles, such as renzina or podzol. In the final activity, we apply what we have learned in the previous phases to create a cartoon, or, for younger children, a puppet of Enrico using recycled materials. I would like to emphasize that imagination and creativity are powerful tools for breaking free from rigid patterns that often hinder the identification of new solutions to current problems. As the writer, poet, and educator Gianni Rodari once said, "It takes a strong imagination to be a true scientist, to imagine things that don't yet exist and discover them, to imagine a better world than the one we live in, and get to work to build it." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erika. Are there any questions for Erika?
There are no questions yet. No.
Not yet. Are there any other questions? Elin,
No,
do you have any more?
There are no other questions.
No other questions. Okay. So then I want to thank you very much for your presentations and for your inspiring work on this. And I hope that we will go on and work with soils and nature and connect children with nature, because I think, as you do, that is a very interesting and important topic. So I would like to thank all of you who has presented today and all of you who has participated and joined the webinar. Thank you very much, and see you in the future. If you have any questions more, when you think about this a little bit more, you can, I think, ask a question on the website, and we will connect you to the researchers and teachers and so on, persons presented. So thank you very much for today. Bye-bye.